welcome to the sew along for the Madalynne Simplicity 3118, a cropped corset as well as matching skort. I decided to dress for the occasion. Hello, I'm Maddie from Madalynne Intimates, and I'm a lingerie sewing teacher, pattern designer, as well as a custom bra maker. If you're into anything DIY lingerie, be sure to check out our other videos, head on over to our website, follow us on IG, and hey, I even wrote a book on DIY lingerie. In this sew along, I'm going to be going over everything from what fabric you should use, what trims you should use, what fabric you should use for which pattern pieces, as well as all sewing steps. What I won't be going over is fit alterations. But if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the comments below or email hello@madalynne.com. So let's get started. Fabrics and notions. I'm going to break this into fabrics and notions for the cropped corset and fabrics and notions for the skort. I think it's much easier to understand that way. For the cropped corset, you should have pattern piece number 1, which is corset front, pattern piece number 2, which is the facing for the corset front, pattern piece number 3, which is corset middle front, pattern piece number 4, which is corset side front, pattern piece number 5, which is corset back, and pattern piece number 6, which is corset side back. For all of these pieces, I am using this beautiful brocade that I bought in Nice, France. The great thing about sew along is I get to get a little bit of personal sewing in. And for all of these pieces, I have lined it with coutil. Coutil is a classic fabric that is used in corsetry. I have spray basted it to this brocade because if you know, brocade, it frays like a bitch. So lining it or interlining it with the coutil helps it from fraying as well as stabilizes it. Now, coutil is hard to find because it is a classic corset fabric. If you cannot find it, if it's not readily available to you, or let's just say you have something else in your stash like a calico or a drill or a twill, you could use that to stabilize your fabric. Now, how did I line all of these? Basically, what I did is I block fuse. And then I laid the brocade out, I spray basted it with my Otis 505 spray adhesive, and then I laid the coutil on top, pressed it down, and then cut it out all as one layer. Now for the trims, I'm going to remove this zipper because we don't need that, we need that for the skort. For the notions, you will need 2 types of boning. You can use plastic boning, but I'm going to use some classic corset boning to make it just a little bit more corset-y. This is flat steel boning. And your boning, if you're buying the pre-cut kind, your boning should be about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch from the top and bottom edge. We'll get to that later on in the sew along. I'm also using spiral steel boning. So this one bends sideways as well as front and back. And this one, the flat steel, only bends front and back. It does not bend side to side. I use the flat steel on either sides of the eyelets. This is classic corsetry. When the eyelets are on the back of the corset, you want this flat steel so that when you start lacing it up, it doesn't bow. So this type of boning helps stabilize those eyelets so you have that nice straight line when you're lacing. And the spiral steel is used in all the other boning channels and offers a little bit more flexibility and allows you to move. Other notions that you need for this step are grommets. You can use eyelets, grommets, and those will be used in the corset front. Later on the sewing, I will get to that. Be sure, something to keep in mind about grommets is that they are specific to your grommet press. So I always get the question, oh, what grommets do you have? What press do you use? So I have an industrial press, so I get the grommets for my industrial press. So if you're using a hand press, Prim makes a great hand press. Get your eyelets or grommets from Prim. Don't just buy any eyelets and then you try to use any hand press or an industrial press because they are specific to the tool that you use. Other notions that you will need for the cropped corset is twill tape. This is a lot. You don't need this much, but I just have a whole roll, but you need twill tape. That is about 1/2 inch wide. What you want to keep in mind is that your boning is going to go inside your twill tape. So you want your boning or your channeling to be wider than your boning. That is key. So don't buy a 1/4 of an inch twill tape and get 3/8 of an inch boning because it won't fit inside. The last thing that you will need is binding. So there is a pattern piece for the binding, but I am just used to cutting out binding that's either 1 inch or 2 inches wide. I made mine a little bit wider just because this is a brocade and it is really bulky. So I think I'm going to need a wider binding. You can also buy pre-cut binding. I know they make pre-made as pre-cut. Moving on to the Skort, I have pattern piece number 8, which is Skort front, and pattern piece number 9, which is Skort back, as well as the facings, which is pattern piece number 13. And pattern piece number 12. Now for the Skort front and the Skort back, it is just a single layer. They're actually 2 pieces, but each piece is a single layer of the brocade or the tweed. And then for the facings, I interline them or added interlining to them. It's a fusible interline just to stabilize it. And the only notion that I will need for the Skort is a zipper. And here is my invisible zipper. The only other pattern piece that you will need for the Skort is the overlay. You have your Skort back overlay and your Skort front overlay. Now these pattern pieces are huge. This Skort back pattern piece is ginormous. I didn't cut this out because obviously I can't fit it all onto one screen, but you want to have this cut out, and I recommend using a fabric that presses really nicely. A perfect example is a cotton because it creases so that when you make those pleats, it's really going to hold those pleats. Now before we get started sewing, it's so important to transfer all your markings, especially these pleat markings. Let's start sewing. If you're following along with the written instructions, I will be going through steps number 1 through steps number 6. I'm going a little bit out of order because I want to show you a really helpful tip when sewing the boning channels on the center front piece. But all the steps are the same. For step number 1, it says to base the main fabric to the inner lining fabric. Now back in the fabric and trim section, I said that I use Bodice 505 spray adhesive to adhere the main fabric to the inner lining. If you absolutely hate spray adhesive, you don't want to use any type of glue, even if it's temporary, this is an alternative that you can use or that you can do is you can stitch those pieces together prior to sewing. Now, the first step in the instructions, in the written instructions, is to sew the facing, which I have here, to the center front piece. Now, I went ahead and I just sewed all the pieces together. It's just all straight stitches. This is at the end of step 6. You will have all these together. But in the first step, it says to sew the front facing to the front piece. And that to use and also in the instructions, it says to turn back this edge, the center front facing edge, and stitch that down. I did a serge. If you have a serger, you can serge this edge. You can also turn it back. This fabric that I'm using, as well as the inner lining, is really thick. So I want to use a serge because it would reduce bulk. Now, the instructions state to turn this back to the wrong side and then to sew the stitches that will form the boning channels, which are these lines right here. I think it's really helpful. You can mark them as well, but when you actually put this underneath your machine, I think it's really helpful to put your boning down and just as you're sewing or to just start sewing, to know that you need to have enough room to fit this inside. So I will show you how that we stitch down the boning channels and that how we can use the actual boning as a guide so that our stitches aren't super close together. Also, I did not press any of these, so I'm going to press them and then I'm going to sew my stitch lines to form my boning channels. I have pressed all my seams so that it looks much nicer, and then I sewed all the rows of stitching to form the boning channels. Now, the front facing was sewn at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. When I was sewing the boning channels, it got really close to the edge of the facing. So if you're worried that let's just say you use wider grommets, so you need to extend your stitching out a little bit more, and you're not gonna have enough room, and your second row of boning stitching for the second one, that's a tongue twister, is going to extend past the facing, you can take out your facing and sew it with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, or maybe 3/8 or even 1/4. It won't affect the fit, so that you can have enough room to sew the second boning channel. Okay, the instructions also say to insert your grommets now. I like to wait till the very end to insert them because I don't like to have metal hitting my machine while I'm sewing it. So I'm gonna do that at the end. I'm also not gonna be going over how to insert grommets because how you insert grommets is specific to the type of press that you have. I have an industrial press because we sew a lot of corsets here in the studio, but you might have a hand press. So how you apply the grommets and what type of grommets that you have will be dependent on the type of press that you have. All right, the next step is to apply the boning tape to the seam allowances. Now, the thing to remember when applying the boning tape is that you have each boning tape has 3 rows of stitches. The first one is through the seam allowances only. The second and the third are through all layers of fabric. So you are going to lay your channeling on, or your boning tape. I like to call it channeling because I'm just used to the bra. In bra sewing, it's called channeling. You are gonna lay your twill tape or your boning channels on top of that seam allowance so that it is right next to that stitch line. You are gonna stitch about a 1/16 of an inch away from that, from the edge of the tape. And this is through the seam allowances only. Then you are going to trim your seam allowances because your twill tape is only 1/2 of an inch, but your seam allowance is 5/8. So you're gonna trim those seam allowances. Then you're gonna flip it to the right side and you're gonna sew an edge stitch. An edge stitch is a common stitch that is used in sewing. And then you are going to stitch 3/8 of an inch away from that initial edge stitch to create a boning channel. Tape has been sewn to all seams. It looks so clean on the inside. As you can see, there is 3 lines of stitching. So there's 1 line that was through the seam allowances only, and that was just to attach the twill tape to the seam allowances. Then the next stitch line was the edge stitch, and then the next stitch line was to close off the twill tape so that it formed the boning channel. The next step, so in your written instructions, we are now on the binding step. So there are so many ways to make binding. You could buy pre-made binding. You can make your own with your self fabric. So the instructions do come with steps to making binding, self-made binding with a pattern piece that they created. Or that comes with the pattern. I cut it out and then I folded the edges to the inside to create my long strip of binding. Now with bias binding, the way that you apply it can be so many different ways. And it really depends on what you're most comfortable with. I feel like everybody has their own method of applying bias binding. Some people don't mind that there's a stitch line on the outside. Some people are like, no, I'm gonna do a stitch in the ditch so that there's no stitch line. So I'm gonna leave up to you how you want to apply your bias binding. But the thing to remember is that I personally like to sew the binding on one edge then insert the boning, then apply the binding on the other edge. Less likely that you will hit a boning with your needle or you'll break a needle. So I'm going to apply the binding along the top edge, then I'll insert the boning, and then I'll apply the binding on the bottom edge. And just to show you how the boning is inserted, is that goes in between it goes inside where that twill tip is. You just put it right in there, and it should be about 1/4 inch from the top and the bottom. And then once I put on the binding, I will show you how to finish it off in the next step. Bias binding has been applied to the top edge, the bottom edge, boning has been inserted. For the center front edge, how do you finish off the binding? Is you just wrap it around to the wrong side and then do a straight stitch to tack it. Now, I was questioning whether I should do pink laces, but you know what? I just went all in and I did pink grommets and pink laces. Also on the back too, added pink grommets and pink laces. All right, let's move on to the skort. Moving on to the skort, I will be going through steps 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now it's really hard to show the pieces on one single frame in the camera, so I actually did all of these steps because I actually think that it's easier to show the after rather than trying to explain it to you before. And you can refer to your written instructions if you want to see how the pieces come together. But sewed the long overlays together, the long rectangles along the short edge. Then finish the front edge of the skort as well as the bottom edge of the skort, and then made all the pleats. So all the pleats are sewn to the dots that are on your pattern pieces, and then pressed it in place to get those nice creases. Now let's put together the shorts and attach the overlay to the shorts. Once the overlay is assembled, then let's move on to putting together the skort front and the skort back, which is steps number 5, 6, 7, and then we'll move on to number 8. So first step is that you want to stay stitch your waistlines. Since brocade is phrased like crazy, I actually serged it, which kind of acts as a stay stitch. Then I sewed the darts on the skort back. Then I sewed the back rise as well as the front rise. The next step is to pin the skort to the top edge of the waistline. And the skort will extend from the wearer's left side all the way to the front, and it'll stop short of the other side seam. Once the overlay is pinned to the skort, baste it along the waistline. Now that the overlay is basted to the skort along the waistline, I then went ahead and I sewed the inseam and then hemmed the bottom edges. The next step is that you will insert the zipper. Now, because zipper insertion varies from the type of zipper that you are using, I'm using an invisible zipper, you might be using a regular zipper, so follow whatever instructions come with your zipper to insert it to the skort. What you want to do is you want the zipper to end at the waistband, because the waistband will be secured together with hook and eyes, not the zipper. The next step is to assemble the waistband. So I sewed the waistbands together front to back and then attached them along the top edge. Then I did an edge stitch to keep the seam allowance to pressing that way and folding towards the inside. I also serged the one edge because brocade frays like crazy. The other edge is interfaced so it won't fray. So close to finishing. The zipper has been inserted, also finished off the rest of the seam. Now is to attach the waistbands. If you're following along with the instructions, this is, well, the last steps, which are 14 through 18. For finishing, down here, we already did that, so you don't have to do it if you already did it. All right, so the first step is that you are going to pin the waistband to the front skort along the waistline. You want to leave 5/8 of an inch from where the zipper was inserted to clean finish the waistband facing to it. I'm going to pin at one edge, and then I'm going to pin the side seams together at the other side, and then I'm going to pin in between. Once you sew the waistband to the skort, then you will finish off the ends of the waistband by folding this back and sewing a straight stitch. You want to get super close to where that zipper is so that when you flip it to the right side, it all aligns. Then once you sew that stitch, you will flip the waistband to the inside and then finish off the inside of the waistband. Waistband is sewn to the skort. The last step is to hand sew some hooks and eyes so that the waistband closes at the top edge. But watching someone sew on hand sew hooks and eyes is like watching paint dry, so I will save you the boredom. And that completes the sew along for the 3118. So you have the cropped corset top and then the skort. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the comments below, or you can email hello@madalynne.com.